Adam, what's going on, brother? So I'm just going to read this line here real quick because I think
Yeah.
it's insanely powerful, and I think it's a perfect launching pad for us. Judging by your book and this one sentence that I'm going to read, trauma is notorious for trapping people in the pain of their past. When you live in defeat, it can be difficult to embrace the hope and the victory available in Christ. I would really love to start there because, man, do we know a lot of people, I'm sure,
Yeah.
that have been through trauma but stay in trauma, and it's
Hmm.
very hard for us to navigate that. But I would love for you just to share your story from there and just a
Absolutely.
launching pad from that sentence.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to come on. I know that we've had a couple of issues getting scheduled and interruptions, but we're here, and I'm
We're
so
here.
grateful for the opportunity. So, yeah, trauma has a way of keeping us a prisoner to our past, and it can keep us there as long as we allow it to be. And I want you to know that I'm going to share my story in a very real, very authentic, very vulnerable way. And it's still challenging me to share some of this stuff, but I believe that there's a purpose behind it, and there's an opportunity for other people to experience a moment where they can choose freedom and they can choose a path of healing. Um, and so for me, it began when I was a little boy. My parents divorced, a not uncommon situation, and when they divorced, I was left with a neighbor who was an older male, and the older male would let me watch the good cartoons. I always joke and say it's the ones that end with "that's all, folks." It was the good cartoons back then, wasn't the weird ones, and Bugs Bunny and all those guys, And then I had the good cereal, and so all the sugar-filled poison toxin cereal. So,
Right.
and then let me go play outside, and then one day it turned to a really darker way of doing things, and it was he put a VHS tape in to a VCR that was sitting on top of a big console TV, and in a room I referred to as the blue room. I remember it having a blue walls, and it was pornography, and so that was my first exposure to pornography and to really true evil. And I don't remember how long it went on, but he turned quickly into not just watching, but doing things to me that he had seen on, that we were watching on this TV. And it was, it was forced, it was evil, it was despicable, but it put a grip of fear in my life that it's hard to convey as a man. If you knew me in person, you knew that, I have a pretty strong work ethic. I'm pretty tough. I'm pretty strong. I was a cop for about 6 years. I did day shift, night shift, traffic homicide, criminal investigations, hostage negotiations. Never ran away from a fight, and won't run away from one today. But for a long time, fear had a grip on me, and it started at a young age. And I remember vividly telling me, if you tell anybody about this, I'm going to kill you. In so many words, it was a little bit more explicit than that. And he knew where I lived. I was in his care alone quite a bit, and that kind of put a grip of fear on me, along with guilt, along with shame. I remember going through some issues later on where I couldn't control bowel movements, or I had speech impediment. So I was having, they were taking me to speech therapists and doctors and different things, trying to figure out what was wrong with this kid, right? And I didn't begin addressing this for probably, I guess, right at around 20 years later. I didn't begin addressing it. That happened when I was around 5, and then my mother remarried a preacher, so we were in church. I always jokingly say 12, 13 days a week. We were there all the time. And so I grew up hearing sermons a lot and going to church, and always admired the leaders in the church. I always kind of looked up to them, right? And then one day I was left with a babysitter. I was 15 years old, and I was left with this babysitter who was a leader in the church, and she was in her 30s and married and had children and was a worship leader. And I remember one of the first nights I stayed with her, she made strawberry daiquiris with Bacardi, and we started having sex like every time we got together, and it was very frequent, and it was you know, it was fun, it was enjoyable, but I was so deceived because it didn't just start like that. It was the things that they'd say grooming me, or she'd say grooming me and preparing me for it. And because what they did was tied what I saw in the church and who I wanted to be associated with church ministry to God put you here for this purpose, to be a part of my life for this reason. And if you really want to be a part of what God's called you to do, then you need to be a part of this season where He's called you to be a part of my healing. And deep manipulation, deep deception, a lot of evil. And a lot of people, I think want to pretend that things like this don't happen in churches across our country. And I'm not saying churches aren't a safe place, but there's just some things that should never happen, and situations. And so I rocked on with that. That started when I was around 15. And then I was blessed with a vehicle. My dad gave me a vehicle when I was around 16, and it was a Geo Metro hatchback, mint green, manual transmission. Got about 60
those.
miles to the gallon.
Yeah, I remember
and
those.
So I started going to a different church, man. And I'd go to a different church when I could. And on one Wednesday night, I remember vividly going to this other church in town. It was a bigger church, and it was a youth service, right? It was Wednesday night, teenagers and young adults, and I pulled up and I locked my keys in my car, and I was like, crap. I called my dad, and me and this worship leader lady had a disagreement, and I didn't want to do this anymore. And I told her I didn't want to do this anymore. And she was really upset that I had other girls that I was talking to at school, and she wanted me to marry her as soon as I turned 18 and all this other stuff. And I remember calling my dad saying, hey, I locked my keys in my car. Can you come help me? And my dad pulled up, and in his record, he's run a auto collision center and run tow trucks records all his life. And I've been a part of that, been around it as much as I could. And I jumped in his truck and I locked the doors. I'm like, hey, before you unlock my car, I got to tell you something. I'm in trouble and I need help. And I told him, and his first move was, or his first words were, he was like very angry. We'll just put it that way. He was very angry. Angry.
But not angry with you.
Oh, no.
He's just angry at the situation.
Angry with the other. Yeah. He was angry with the people who had sort of put me in that situation, and angry with, really, really angry with the people who had hurt me. And then he was like, I gotta protect you. That was his first move,
Can you tell me or tell us maybe even the words that you remember his response? Like, I know you felt the feeling that he was angry, right, as any father would be.
Oh yeah, he was
like irate, right?
Yeah, in so many words, he was like, I'm about to F and kill everybody. Like right. He was, his first move was, I think, and I feel, is a proper parental response to one of your children being hurt on such a level like that. And but that is how any good dad should respond. And I'm not condoning violence, but I'm going to tell you, I love Jesus with all my heart. And I'm so grateful that he restored me and he's redeemed me and he's working on healing me now. And he continues to work on me every day. All right. But, and I want to spend eternity with him. But if somebody hurts one of my children, I have no problem digging their blood out from under my fingernails. Yeah. Period. And we have to have a culture of fathers out there who are willing to say, you're not going to hurt my child. I'm going to do everything. And I'm not saying be overprotective, but I'm saying there is evil in this world. And most men are aware of it. I don't know that everybody's aware of it on the level that cops know exists, or military or other first responders for that matter. But there is evil in this world. Educate yourself. Be aware of the evil in this world and how it operates, and know that your child is a target. And there's an enemy. that not only wants to destroy you, but he just wants you out of the way so he can get your children. And the enemy's always gone after children. And I've yet to like really understand why, but I feel like from my experience is if he can expose you to darkness and evil and trauma and pain at a young age, he sort of has a grip on your direction and your path and your destiny as you go forward in life. And so that ended when I was around 16 with the lady from the church. And to say that I was a little off when it came to perspective of relationships, to say that I was a little off when it came to a perspective of trust,
100%.
or my perspective of church, or my relationship with God was an understatement. And but I met this young lady when I was a senior in high school, and we were in class together. So I'm 18 and she's 18, and we start talking every day, and we could not talk enough, man. Like we would talk all the time. And so we graduated in May of 2000 and got married September of that year. And I told her about all these things that happened, but neither one of us understood how it affected me and just how jacked up I really was. And
So you told her all this.
oh, absolutely. I told her what happened, and she knew about all of it, but I don't think either one of us knew how messed up I was.
Well, so there's a, first of all, to hear that, right? I mean, I interviewed R.A. Dickey, who's professional baseball player, Cy Young Award winner, known for the knuckleball, literally just a couple weeks ago. And, he went through a very similar experience you did growing up. Christ follower, now and all that. But he was married for years and never told his wife. There was so much confusion around what had happened, right? Almost to the point where he was just like, I think I remember his words of just being like, I just don't even want to remember that happened. I'm just not even going to deal with it. I'm just going to block it out. And what happened is it really started to fester into his relationships. It started to fester into baseball. It started to fester into every area of his life.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until he had been married for years and he sat down with a counselor and he went through one-on-one sessions, and then he brought his wife in and then told her everything. So I just want to, I share that with you because your bravery, right? I mean, and maybe it didn't feel like you were exercising a ton of courage when you were telling her this. Maybe it even felt natural to you because you guys had such a great relationship. You even mentioned like we couldn't talk enough.
Yeah.
But there was probably there had to be maybe a certain level of like, oh my gosh, if I tell her this, she could leave, right? Was there, recalling back on that conversation or when you told her that, were there any fears like that, or were you just more or less more accepting of it, and it was part of your unfortunate journey, but it was who you were, or was it maybe even a little bit of both?
I think for me is, and this sounds super weird or soft or whatever, but I felt safe with her.
Yeah.
And I felt an authentic love like I never felt from another person before. Like I felt like I could tell her, and still feel like I could tell her anything today, but it was like I wanted her to know everything. And I do not under any circumstance recommend anyone getting married at 18 years old, not because of love or anything, but I think for me it was, and I don't regret marrying her at all. I wish I could have given her a better version of who I was. And I told her about it, but I was pretty messed up for a long time, and so what that looked like for me was our first year of marriage. Anytime there was conflict, I'd try to run from it. I would try to run from it. Anytime there was a disagreement, I'd try to run from it. I would try to seek fulfillment in jobs and didn't have a clue what purpose or identity was at all until early 2004, when our first child was coming around. He was going to be born in March of 04. or he was born in March of '04. And I remember early that year standing outside our house we were living in at the time and thinking, I'm about to be a dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is scary. Like, what do I need? Like, everything in me, I wanted to be a good dad. And so I just kind of was doing some reflection, and I realized that I had something in me that wasn't quite right. And it was just so much hate for people who had hurt me.
Yeah.
And so much unforgiveness and so much resentment. And I began a process of like saying, okay, I forgive them. I forgive
Can
them.
I ask you,
Yeah.
and I don't mean to cut you out. I'm just curious. Man, first of all, let me just pause here for a second, man. Thank you for bringing your most authentic self to this. I know this is not easy to talk about, and I know that this is part of what you talk about all the time, and you wrote a whole book on it, and this is how you navigate your life. At the same time, even when I recount my story, my childhood, and lots of darkness, a lot of chaos, there's still that part of me, even though I'm like, hey, it's who I am. It's how I was raised, and it's how I'm wired, and I've just navigated through it. Right. But
Yeah.
I also remember this. It was like a slow boil of anger. It was nothing that ever like turned on like a light switch, but it was like this festering slow boil over time. And here's where it actually kind of spilled out for me. It's when I actually met my wife. And what I found that I was doing, craziness, right? Because I had really toxic father figures in and out of my life, my mother in and out, like this overwhelming fear of people leave, right? I would purposely seek out relationships that I knew wouldn't work out, that I knew were temporary, that I knew were just maybe only physical, right? When I was dating somebody. Then I meet my wife and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's the most amazing woman in the world. And I couldn't figure it out at the time. I know it now because I look in the rearview mirror, but I would purposely sabotage the relationship because I loved her so much. And this doesn't make any sense when you explain to somebody who's quote unquote gone through like something quite normal. I would sabotage the relationship because I wanted to make sure if anybody was going to leave, it was going to be me leaving her, not the other way around.
Yep.
And it's crazy, right?
Yep.
But I noticed that my anger and my resentment and my trauma came when I met the best person in the world that I could have a relationship with. That's when the boil really started. And you would think it'd be the opposite.
You would.
So I'm curious, going back to the question, was it like something profound that might have happened that you realized how angry you were? Or was it more like over time, you're like, I have felt the heat on this for quite some time. And now it's just, unfortunately, it's a rolling boil.
Yeah. I think that it was something that just kind of simmered under the surface for a long time for me.
Yeah.
And because I mean, look, as a little boy, I learned how to put on a mask and pretend like everything is okay.
Yep.
And if you would ask me, are you good? Are you okay? I'm fine. And I learned how to be strong, not physically, but internally, mentally.
Yeah.
I learned how to be strong from a young age. And it requires a level of strength that not a lot of people will understand. And so it was a slow boil, but I felt like, and I still didn't have it figured out. But before our first son was born, I knew that I needed to start addressing this inside. And so I stopped bouncing from career to career and job to job and this and that. I got into pest control and kind of stayed in that until I got into law enforcement several years later. But I started settling down when he was born, and then our daughter was born a few years later. And we were living in Auburn, Alabama, and I was working up there for a commercial pest control company. And our oldest son found my wife's birth control and ate all of it. He thought it was candy. And so she called me freaking out, and she was like, what are we going to do? He ate all this, all my birth control. And so called 911 poison control. And they're like, he'll be fine. But it really only affected us because about a month later found out she was pregnant, and we moved back home. And so I went to work for a pest control company, a small family-owned pest control company, as a service manager. And my wife couldn't work; she had pregnancy complications, bedridden, and the owner's son kept showing up late to work every day. And I went to the owner one day, and I'm like, "Look, I've got a team of guys. I'm in my 20s, managing a team, and I'm like, your son keeps showing up late for work." And he was like, "Well, what would you do if it was somebody else?" I said, "I'd fire him." So I did. And March 5th, 2009, they fired me and hired him in my spot. And that was my oldest son's birthday. So I went home that day, and everybody's at home, and they got all the balloons and the candles and the cake and all the happy family, and everybody's there. And I've got to tell my wife I don't have a job. And, I know, like a lot of dads, I tie a lot of my worth into how I take care of my family, provision, protection, leading them. And man, I felt like a piece of trash. I felt lower than low because I'm working like cutting grass, washing cars. We wound up on food stamps and welfare and all this other stuff, and having people bring groceries and drop them off at our doorstep. But through it all, God was faithful. We were sustained through it all. And then that fall, I raised my right hand and swore an oath to become a law enforcement officer. And I was the most unhealthiest physically I'd ever been. I was 270 pounds, which is about what I am now, but a completely different composition of 270. Completely different. Like a size 42 waist pants, 44, whatever. I was humongous. And I'd started running. I'd started training and preparing. And I felt like the day I swore in that I was pretty squared away, like going to church, reading my Bible, praying, but still blocking out a lot of stuff that had happened in my life, a lot of pain, and pretending like, okay, I've dealt with it. I said I've forgiven them and I moved on, but I never really processed it. And get into law enforcement. And here's the thing. Pressure has a way of either destroying you, or it can bring out the best in you. And with 3 children, a wife, 1 income, and as a cop, the salary was not phenomenal. We'll just say that.
Yeah.
And then seeing the things that I saw, I started drinking. I became emotionally numb. I locked down. I shut down. I just got to a point, man, I'm like, this is all a bunch of bullcrap. And I'm so sick of struggling. I'm so sick of fighting. I'm so tired of hurting all the time. And no matter where I turn, there's pain. And one day I came home and I took off my gear and I sat in a recliner in our living room of the house we were in at the time. And I remember my wife standing behind me at the kitchen island with the sink going, and she turned the water off. And she said, "Hey, babe, how was your day?" And I should have said, "Hey, I had a really hard day today. Can we talk about this later? Can I just have a few minutes?" But instead, I was a jerk and cold and hard and cynical, and I said, "Fine." Just was a jerk in the way I said it. And there's power not just in your words, but how you say it.
How you say it.
And she said, "When did you become such a hole?" And so turned into an argument. I packed my stuff and I did what I knew how to do best, and that was run. I went and stayed in a portable office building. It had running water, it had bathroom. It was barely a bathroom, but it had one. And I had a cot, and I stayed there for a while. And I got up on a Sunday morning and put on my uniform and got in my patrol car and went to work. And I pulled my car into the parking lot of an abandoned gas station. I backed my car up and I parked in front of the store, where's the building, and pulled my sidearm out. Completely done with life, man. Done. Like, because, I became a cop for a few reasons. Number one, because I saw cops around my dad my whole life, good men. I wanted to be like them. But also, when my kids were asked at the playground or at school, "What's your daddy do?" I want them to say with pride, "My daddy's a police officer."
Yep.
I wanted my wife to be proud of me, and all the people that I love the most, I'd pushed away, not even realizing what I was doing. And I was pushing them away because I'd come home, I'd be quiet, I'd be isolated, I'd be withdrawn, I'd be hard, I'd be cold, I'd be a jerk. And I was tired of hurting. I felt like I had no other option and no other avenue, and that the only way that anybody else would have a good life would be if I was gone. I had a bad case of victim mentality. And I paused instead of pulling the trigger. And in that pause, an angry, hurt, fearful, guilty, shameful man cried out to a living God and said, "I don't know where you're at. I don't know if you can hear me, but if you have a reason for me to be here, if you have a plan for me, you can have my life. Otherwise, I'm done." And I've never felt what I felt in that moment. No alcohol ever gave me this peace. No affair with another woman ever gave me this peace. No sex ever gave me this peace. Nothing ever made me feel as loved as I felt in the car that day. And look, I can't explain it, but I'll tell you this. I had a peace come over me that I have tried since 2015 to write. 6.5 million words. I've tried to put it into words in 9 books. I've tried to put it into blogs and articles and talks and all this other stuff. I cannot properly or adequately begin to convey the amount of peace that's available in that moment of broken surrender. And I felt an embrace that was a million times stronger than any love I've ever felt from a human. And I had a will to live again. I had a fire to fight again. And I looked around at my situation and I knew that it was a mess, but I knew that I had something inside of me to fight with again. And now I had an encounter with the living God. That's what I firmly believe to this day. I had an encounter with the living God, but I still had something I had to do. And so I went and found my wife that afternoon. I told her what had happened. I told her I was sorry. I recognized what I'd done wrong, and God healed my marriage. And in September this year, we'll celebrate 23 years. 3 beautiful kids. They're doing a phenomenal job. I'm still here. And, I think sometimes where my family would be and what pain that they would have to carry had I left my pain with them. Because that's all I would have done was transferred all the pain that I was carrying onto their shoulders for the rest of their life. And I ain't that kind of man. It doesn't matter how heavy things get. I'm a fighter. I may never step foot into a ring to fight, but I'm a fighter. And I'm a survivor. I'm an overcomer. And I don't know what you've gone through if you're listening to this and you're a dad somewhere, you're a man, whatever you've gone through. I don't know what you've gone through, but you can never show up and be the best version of yourself for your wife or for your children until you address the bull crap that you've carried in your own strength and your own power. You try to, and it's crushing you. But there's a peace available that will give you strength beyond measure. There's a love available that will empower you to love them the right way. And you can never love them the right way until you encounter this love on a very authentic and very real level. And I've stood in front of, 1,000, 1,300 cops in a casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And I shared my story and I shared the Live Unconquered code. And I told them I'm here today because of one man, and his name is Jesus. You don't have to believe the same way I do, but I can tell you who I met that day. It wasn't at a church altar or at a church service with a beautiful choir singing in the background. It wasn't a pastor praying with me. He can meet you right wherever you are. Jesus died so that you could be set free. And now I believe that we're healed ultimately when we get into eternity. But you have 2 paths you can take. You have one that is a path where you continue to hurt, and as a consequence, you hurt everybody around you. Or you can take a path and begin healing. And when you begin healing, you love differently. You live differently. And so I created this brand, Live Unconquered, so I could tell everybody in the world, I know that you've gone through some stuff, and it may not be the same stuff I've gone through. But if you choose to surrender the right way and surrender the brokenness and the pain, you can live a way that's above defeat. You don't have to give in to defeat. As long as you still got a beat in your heart and you got air in your breath, in your lungs, you've got a fight in you that you can take to the evil of this world, and you can overcome.
My gosh, man. I've done 1,100 episodes. I think I've maybe shed a tear 10 times. So, less than 1% of the time, this is one of them. I'm picturing you in your car, and I'm picturing you with this overwhelming feeling that people around you in life would be better without you. Mm-hmm. I think, if you look at the killers out there, right? The things that take men's life, especially between the age of 25 and 52, suicide is way up there.
Oh yeah.
I think it's first or second. And in that moment, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
I'm also picturing you surrendering, which, by the way, let's just call it for what it is. It's one of the most hardest things in the world for a man to do.
Yes, it is.
Right? It really is. And even the word surrender is like, wait, what? You want me to do what?
Yeah.
However, on the other side of that is exactly what you just described. I had to do a very similar thing when I started this mission. And it began with a really dark moment. And it began with being in the bowels of my own hell, mentally and emotionally, and taking it out on one of my kids. And, I remember sitting in my office saying to myself, the world would be better without me.
Mm-hmm.
But when you surrender like you did, like I did, it's terrifying.
It is.
At first. Like right before you step off, it's almost like the feeling. I've never skydived before, but I always sit there and I think, as long as I can push myself out of that plane, I think I'll be okay after that. Yeah. Right. But it's actually stepping off and having the faith that chute is going to work and that everything will be okay when I'll get down to the ground. But it's that first step off point. And for you and for me and for a lot of us who have overcome trauma, it is that step off point that's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
I would love for you to share, how did your wife respond when you just surrendered? You told her what happened and that you were sorry and things were going to be better. How did she respond with that?
She welcomed me with open arms and she embraced me. And that's the thing, man. The key moments in my life have always been around an embrace. It was embraced by God in a patrol car, embraced by my wife that day, and time again, embraced by my family, embraced by my children. And, I have been far from perfect, and trying to heal is not, it's messy. It's not, I forget who said it. This is not mine, but it's not a straight line. It's like this, it's messy. And I've been a mess, but I have the guts to be able to look at you in the face and in the eyes and tell you I've been a mess. But I believe God every once in a while puts somebody in our life that shows us what true love looks like.
Yeah.
And if we're not careful, we push them away because we don't know how to accept that. We don't know how to receive that kind of love. And I want you to know, man, I know there's a lot of guys that who go through a lot of stuff and relationships. No, they're not perfect. But if you can learn to receive that kind of love, it'll change everything. Don't let fear keep you from experiencing the best this life has for you. That scariest step, man, that surrender, in this world we hear surrender means that you're losing a battle. But the kingdom of God is opposite to everything we know in this world. And in his kingdom, surrender leads to victory. In this world, surrender, it seems, leads to defeat. But this surrender I'm talking about leads you to a place of peace. It leads you to a place of hope. It leads you to victory like you've never experienced before. Because there's just some battles you can't fight alone.
Yeah. I would say, I don't know if we should fight hardly any battles on our own. I mean, because God actually never really intended us to do that.
No, he never
You
did.
know, it's the whole iron sharpens iron, you know. Even Jesus had his band of brothers.
Yeah.
He had his trusted advisors, and there was 12 of them, right? Which is really fascinating. He was the perfect man, but still did life as a community, as
absolutely.
a team, you know?
Yeah.
But so, you know, 9 books later, and this incredible mission of helping other people overcome trauma. What would you say to people? I think we've really addressed very well. You've really addressed really well to people going through something. And then there's that silver lining. You know, it's like, hey, if you're feeling this, on the other side of surrender, there's beauty. So perhaps maybe the next best thing for you to do is simply surrender, you know, to what you can learn, what you can do, how you can grow, how you can evolve. Maybe it's even finding peace in your faith in some way, shape, or form. But here's what I've noticed about trauma in my own life, and I'm sure you have with your own and all the guests that I've interviewed. It is not a linear growth pattern. It is like, oh, I'm growing, I'm learning, and then bam, you just get smacked upside the head. And then you're like, okay, got to dust it off, keep going. And then you go up a little bit more, you grow a little bit more, things are flourishing a little bit more, and then boom, you just get rocked again. So I think a lot of people think like, oh yeah, well, you know, hey, Adam, it's great for you. Or hey, Larry, it's great for you. Like you guys been through it, like, and congratulations. And I'm sure it was easy once you surrendered. That was not the case at all. There were many battles after that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I want you to talk for a moment on what some of the journey has looked like, you know, the beauty, and then also some of the absolute savage sacrifice that you weren't planning on that have come knocking on your door.
Yeah, walking away from a career in law enforcement was hard.
Yeah.
I envisioned spending the rest of my life doing that. I loved it. And I wasn't forced out. I didn't get in trouble. I got up on a Sunday morning and I was putting on my uniform. I'd written and self-published a little book, and I got up that morning and I'm buttoning my uniform shirt and I hear a little still small voice back of my head, and today's the day. And I knew exactly what it meant. And I remember
when you say today's the day, and you knew what it meant.
It meant today's the day you hang it up and you shift. You go in, because he had been pulling me since that encounter in the car. He had been pulling me to do something different, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. You know, I walked away with no safety net. I do not recommend it. I walked away with no safety net, no backup plan, no fallback plan, nothing. And I went out on a mission to touch every soul that I could. I had a little marketing business on the side that kind of helped keep us afloat for a little while. Oddly enough, I never really marketed it. It was word of mouth, and still have it today, 8 years later. And that was scary because I'm analytical. The way my brain is wired up and made, I look at every detail and I try to break everything down and get facts. And for me to take a step that I believe was a big step of faith was scary. But here we are, 9 books later. I can tell you 170,000 lives have been touched through books. I don't know how many through speaking and media and all that stuff. Good Morning America, Team Never Quit, Marcus Luttrell, and all the others. But I know that it's touched a lot of lives, and that's worth it to me. So that was a huge sacrifice. Another sacrifice is continuing to be really vulnerable. because it creates opportunities for someone else's healing, someone else's freedom, someone else's breakthrough. And I am not a victim. I do not look at the world from a victim's perspective, and I don't want you to either. There is a time to mourn and grieve what has been done and what you have lost. And then there is a time to get up, to dust yourself off, to equip yourself, acknowledge the pain, forgive, surrender your heart, surrender your soul every day, and fight back and fight like hell for what matters most. And for 99.999% of us, that's our families. And fight for them, man, because there's going to come a day when you're laying in a box and the only people that are grieving you are the ones you have right now. They're the ones that matter most. And that's the impact I want to make. I could go out and touch 7 billion lives, but if I neglect the ones I have here, I'm a complete and utter total failure.
I want to talk about that for a minute as we wrap up here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something early on in this podcast that I thought was brilliant, right? It's also very obvious, but I want to bring it back to the surface because I want to ask you about your family. So the day that you got fired, March 5th, right? Where you got fired from that business, the pest control business,
Yeah.
and then the guy's son was hired in your position. And you said, I took a lot of pride, as every man does, right, in providing and, providing protection, providing things that they need, right? We get validation doing that. It's like, hey, I put in work.
Yeah.
And because of my value, I get paid. And because I get paid, I get to now provide, which is something that we take so much pride in as men. So it's easy to measure those things, right? It's easy to measure our importance, our value. We get so much validation in the workforce. On the flip side, it's really hard sometimes to understand, well, how do I get measured in the home?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I actually know if I'm doing a good job or not? And quite frankly, what a lot of men do, and this is just something inherent, I think, in us to some degree, is we decompress in the home.
Mm-hmm.
We this is our safe haven, right, against everything else we've been fighting for the day, right? And at the same time, we can treat, and we don't do this on purpose. I really believe the hearts and minds of men are in a good spot, but we treat the people who are most important to us sometimes not the best, or sometimes we do, and we're just like, I don't know if I'm being effective. I don't know if this is moving the needle. I don't know even how to measure this. And by that, we don't necessarily get the validation that we do in the workplace.
Yeah.
However, I heard a mentor of mine told me this a long time ago, and they're like, Larry, if you died tomorrow, your company would send out an email and they'd probably send flowers, and then they'd have you replaced in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Right. And then it would be a story of, yeah, he passed away. Man, no big thing. And then, but your family would carry that, your stories, your legacy, love, everything you left behind for decades and generations. Yet, we put so much time and attention into our careers. So my question back to you is, how can men be better? And how can we equip ourselves to be like, this is how I go about my workday? Boom, 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 boom.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how I fearlessly, ferociously, savagely go about my family.
Mm-hmm. I've walked away from jobs just for my family. Yeah. I think on a very practical level, it's hard for a lot of us to focus on more than one thing at a time, like really intentionally focus on more than one thing at a time. And so when we're in a workforce, have a career, business, whatever, a lot of our thoughts and our energy and focus goes to those things, and we even carry it when we go home. But Marcus Luttrell told me one time, spending some time with him, he looked at me and he was like, your wife doesn't need a warrior in the home.
Yeah.
She needs somebody that's going to be gentle, that's going to be loving, that's going to be kind, somebody that's going to serve. And Jesus, or God's word says for husbands to love their wives as Jesus loves the church. And we can't control how our wife and children treat us. What we have to control is how we love them and how we
Yeah.
show up and be present with them. So I think for me as a cop, it was like right there at the end, I would literally change the type of music I listened to a few minutes before going home and shut down my work brain so that when I got home, I could be husband and father. And if they said, "How was your day?" then we would talk about the day if I wanted to, or give them a high level view of it, and then move on to, "How was your day?" A lot of times we forget, like, we got married to the woman we are married to because we were friends. How did we become
Yep.
friends? Because we showed interest in them instead of it all being about, what are you going to do for me? And that is really hard sometimes if you're juggling all these other things, your trauma, your pain, your work, and all the stress of life and all this other stuff. But man, screw all that stuff. At some point, you just have to say, I'm not letting this bullcrap control me anymore, because it does not matter 10, 15, 20 years from now. What matters most is how I'm teaching my children, especially my boys. I'm teaching my boys how to love in the future when they become men. I'm teaching my daughter the kind of love she can expect from someone else. And I want to set the bar high. I want to set the standard high. And I want them to go into the next generation and say, my dad taught me how to love. My dad taught me how to be loved. My dad taught me how to be respectful, or how to work ethic, or whatever. But how we love our families now is how they're going to expect, or how they're going to love in the future when they have their own families. And so we have to eliminate the disconnect that is created between career, vocation, passion, and family. And we have to say family comes only second to God. And I'm not saying second to ministry. I'm not saying second to purpose. Our family's second to only God. And so you serve God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and then you love your family better than you love anything else. And that comes with communication. It comes with being compassionate. It comes with being kind. It comes with being vulnerable. When you screw up, look at them and say, I screwed up. I messed up. I own it. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? Because it's also teaching them to say, oh my goodness, my dad's not perfect. And he realizes that. And so there's a level of humanity that still exists beyond just being an authoritarian or disciplinarian. You're there and you're being compassionate. You're leading your family in the way that, you want them to lead in the future. Would you want them to treat you the same way? And so it just goes back to the roots of take care of the family. We live in a culture that's so fast and occupied by this bull crap all the time. And we have to set some boundaries up to say, the people inside these four walls is what matters most. Anything we do outside of here is great, but it all comes back to this. And I'm going to do a better job of being a man that leads you the right way.
Man, I want to make sure everybody heard that, because if anything, like one thing I think is really incredible about us as men is we want to serve.
Mm-hmm.
We want to serve very selflessly,
Yep.
right? I think
Absolutely.
sometimes we don't know exactly how to do that, and I think sometimes we do it in more telling than showing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the best lessons in life are caught, not taught. I'm sure. What's your wife's name, Adam?
Amber.
Amber. So you and Amber, I'm guessing, are a lot like Jessica and I. Jessica and I have been married for 20 years. I've known her for 27, and we're best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and my kids are like, "You guys are friends?" I'm like, "Yeah, yeah. She is my best friend." Like, I am not kidding. Like, there's no person on the planet I would rather actually hang out with, spend time with, walk with,
Mm-hmm.
talk with, hike with, work out with than her.
Yeah.
Because she's my friend, right? Yes, she's my wife. Yes, she's my lover, but she's my friend. But at the same time, our view of it is this: we have 4 boys. And my view of it is, I am a walking, talking example of how you love a woman
Mm-hmm.
and how you actually execute a functional relationship that isn't always perfect,
Yeah.
but it is everything that encapsulate what you just said. We sort things out. We work through things. We have conflict resolution skills. When I'm wrong, man, I admit it and I apologize, and I apologize a lot.
Yeah.
And so does she. And my wife is of the belief, I need to show these young men what it's like for a woman to show love to her man.
Yeah.
Like respect, appreciation, love, affection, all of these things, and not to be trampled on. Right. And then I agree with you, man. Like, our most important people in our entire lives, and I think everybody listening to this podcast would agree, they are the most important people in the world. But I think sometimes our actions don't necessarily show that. And you held up your phone because of this, right? Because of these devices. One of the most beautiful gifts that we can give our kids is our attention and our undivided attention. So when they come in, they start talking to us, you put this thing down.
Yep.
Right. And I'm not always great at that.
Yeah. No,
I have to remind myself every day, like, hey, your phone's in your hand, your kid's talking, you put it down.
There you go.
Right. But I love this, man. I want to make sure as we wrap up here, where can men find you, follow you? 9 books, website, coaching, speaking, helping people navigate trauma. Where can men find you and connect with you?
Social media, I'm there, the official Adam Davis, or Instagram official Adam Davis, or my website, theadamdavis.com. Love to hear from you, and that you heard me here on the Dad Edge podcast.
Yeah, I love it, man. Well, listen, we're going to have all your links in the show notes. Here's what I encourage you guys to do. I'm going to have Adam's Instagram link in there and that kind of thing. Like, listen, Adam came on today and really, really, he did not hold anything back. Insanely vulnerable, insanely authentic. And you provided so many breadcrumbs of what we can do for someone who's actually going through trauma. Probably better than anybody I've ever had on the show. If you like what you heard, at the very least, drop Adam. Just drop him a message. Tell him you heard him on the show and thank him for his authenticity and vulnerability. We'll have all the links in the show notes. Adam.
Thank you, brother.
Dude, thank you so much for coming on today. This was so good.
Honored to be here.
Back at you, my friend. Gentlemen, all you have to do is go to thedadedge.com/442 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/442. Adam, from my heart to yours, thank you for the work you're doing. You're changing the world.
Thank you.
Thank you for making me all misty-eyed. Only cried like not even 1% of these shows, but you were one of them, man. When you were talking about you being in the car, oh my gosh, man, I've been there, Yeah. A lot of our guys have been there. So, but thank you,
brother.
Appreciate you, brother.